Innovation. It's interesting because I think one of the things that we've got to deal with is in innovation is the fact that we collaboration is an important part. Yep. That's what we're talking about. But we have worked a lot in the ag tech sector, providing advice to a lot of organizations. But one of the things that a lot of ag techs don't get is the negative information. And we all talk about positives.
Yep.
But some organizations, they have fantastic ideas, but sometimes they might not be applicable to a natural producer. And so that's one of the things that we've seen a lot is, great ideas, but not necessarily solutions focused to the actual producer or what the producer actually wants for ongoing.
Yeah, and even from that perspective, it's the ones that are maybe focusing on the stuff that isn't what the producer's chasing, or even trying to get that innovation actually working in a practical way on farm. That's another kind of hurdle. There's a lot of stuff out there, but you look at how many startups that are out there doing innovative things, how many of those actually end up translating to something real and practical?
Well, and I suppose if you look at it, like we've got some examples like Mick Fells down in Esperance. He's had a whole bunch of different ideas come out over the years, and he's just somebody he's an extremely smart guy, but who is just generating ideas and doing them on farm himself for his own business, and then if it works, selling it to his neighbours. But it's interesting when you think about Sam Brown's going to be coming over here in a minute or two. But when you think about it, Australia is a small country. Well, it's a large country. Geographically, but population-wise it's small. But it actually does make for like a really good test bed for innovation. So I like the idea of global agribusiness coming to Australia and testing ideas. Like if you look at McDonald's, probably one of the food, as you can tell, the two of us are we don't eat McDonald's, as you can tell physically.
No, not at all.
But the reality is that that's a company that has done a massive amount of innovation in the food sector, in the fast food sector itself. But they do actually tend to bring ideas
and trial them
in Australia. So I think, again, we're going on a little bit of a tangent here, but the reality is that they test them here because it's a kind of geographically a spread out country, but it also allows you as a test bed because it's a small population, you can trial things quite easily. I think the McCafe, like the coffees, that was initially in Australia. So I think I can see Sam coming along in the distance there, so we can probably stop talking about McDonald's
and start
at 10 o'clock in the morning.
So we'll welcome Sam in. G'day, Sam. I'll give you a mic in a second.
Thanks, Sam.
There you go, that's yours, it's on. So Sam, you're the CEO of Agriculture Innovation Australia. Do you want to just start with, we just had a really fabulous session there, which the online guests would have been listening into, but give us a quick rundown of actually what you do and what the role of Agriculture Innovation is.
Don't be nervous, there's only 10,000 people on the other end of this camera.
Perfect, no worries, no need to be nervous. Look.
It's on. Yep.
So, Agricultural Innovation Australia is an independent, not-for-profit organisation that has been established to work across agriculture, fisheries and forestry. We work on the complex issues that no individual sector should tackle alone. And that's really important. And the objective is to bring collective investment together to create that meaningful, practical solutions that all sectors can use. And we often think about mixed farming enterprise is a classic example, but there's more up the supply chain that we need to be mindful of as well. That there's lots of issues and pressures coming down. I think we explored that a little bit up there. That there was decadal pressures coming, and more we're seeing these decadal pressures probably and most effectively need a collaborative approach to address them. Singular approaches will probably fade with the investment and pressures going in other areas from time to time, but using that collaborative horsepower that I talked about up there to get a smaller amount of investment across multiple to address some of these big, heavy issues.
Yep, and you're the inaugural CEO, so it's a relatively new kind of organisation. How have you found that transition of starting something brand new and having that cross kind of sector approach? Has it been tricky?
There are complexities to doing things like what we have done. We operate in a space that there's no blueprint for this. We've got sector-specific RDCs that do the specialised work, and they work really on the needs of industry. So, there's lots of pressures. You're seeing multiple speeds, multiple pressures. Some RDCs are working on biosecurity as a burning platform. Others, it's not an issue.
Yep.
They're working more on, some supply chain issues or a market threat. And so there's multiple speeds. So we've got to try and figure out how you actually put those sorts of things together to say, hey, look, this will be an issue in the future. It's been a huge learning experience.
I suppose that is an issue. You've touched on a lot on collaboration,
Yes.
which collaboration is difficult enough in agriculture generally,
Yep.
but across different agricultural sectors. Like, how do you actually get people together and actually discuss their ideas and what they need?
It's an area and a discipline that I think the country needs in agriculture. We need it. So, and I don't use the word collaboration lightly. I think that we can often get muddled up with coordination, cooperation, and collaboration. Everyone sort of might call it collaboration, but they're very different things. They're sort of getting organised. They're investing together for a mutual outcome. Whereas collaboration is something that you are coming together to design and develop something new that no one should own individually, and they need to work on together. It's a really good question about how you bring people together. We've approached it in so many different ways, and some of them have failed. As a startup, we really believe in that. You've got to try things. You've got to learn from those failings. We've sort of applied some new things this year where we really have thought hard about the specialisation of RDCs. So we really want to, we spent a lot of time thinking about where the priorities are. We looked across all 15 RDC strat plans because they're relatively new. I think over 10. I think we're at 11 RDCs have got relatively new strat plans. We looked across those and we look at points of convergence. And say, okay, this is where these points of convergence and the strategies are.
Like a big Venn diagram for the industry.
Yeah, and we'll try to find those magic areas and the sweet spots. But we're also mindful of saying, specialise how you need to specialise. We have to design our collaborations and initiatives that sit over the top that elevate these things. So I often think about the latent potential that sits between sector research and try to raise that in a farmer's sense, farmers sort of talk over the fence. And, that's how they improve productivity. Well, what's the value of that conversation over the fence? That's the latent potential that sits between sectors.
As you were approaching us, Andrew and I were chatting about, we've done a fair bit in the agritech space with the Agritech Association of Australia and just recently at Evocag with a lot of the startups. Now, we often say there's lots of startups out there that don't always translate. They're doing some really innovative, smart stuff, but it doesn't always translate right the way through to being practical stuff on farm. How do we bridge that gap of making more success with those innovations, of making them kind of practical and useful?
Because what we hear a lot of is a lot of farmers saying, look, we've got so many ideas coming towards us with solutions. Sometimes a lot of those solutions are solutions to problems that they don't perceive as a problem. And how do we get, I guess, innovators and startups to actually, because many of them are not coming from agriculture, how do we get them to actually, understand the farmer more? If you're from Melbourne or Brisbane, it's a difficult thing. We're all from agriculture, so we know farmers. But how do we bridge that gap?
Yeah, you're throwing a lot at me in this question, guys. So startups.
Well, you're a highly confident person, Sam.
Give me a break. Startups. You've got a shorter runway. Startups, you have to run quickly, and that's a problem I see. I thought a bit about it up on stage actually, about the short runway, and a lot of these tech companies have to get something out
as quick as possible,
but you're missing the opportunity to think, well, what next? So before I sit down with that farmer and say, look, we've got this technology, it's doing this now, but we've got 5 other things we see coming down the road, we've already architected for that. That's what we did with our environmental accounting platform. We architected it for natural capital, biodiversity, these sorts of climate environmental issues we saw coming. So we stretched ourselves forward because that's the long range. That's how we had to think about it. We heard that they were going to be issues, they weren't as well developed and as organised as emissions at the time. But so you asked that question about startups. So I'm just sympathising there a bit about startups. And there's, in R&D side of the world, there's a lot more straight lines.
Yep.
And in startups and innovation, they're not straight.
Yep.
You're always
Zigzagging
all the time. You've got to tic-tac, change course. But the more you can step back, if you to your question about technology, is to think about that. How does this solve many more things that I'm architected for? But I don't envy. We all have. We did that. What I talked about up on stage. We raised just around $2.4 million from 10 RDCs, small amount here, small amount there.
Yep.
And then we managed to design in a very agile, adaptive way, a product that has achieved a benefit cost ratio of 17 to 1. Mm-hmm. That created that $84 million worth of value.
Yeah.
But by sort of stepping back and seeing all of these things that were coming and getting really super organised and the learning I've taken from it that I didn't expect to get was what I talked about with sustainability. If you don't get organised and you get rushed in terms of reporting, you get stuck. You've reporting. You're on the eve of reporting, and you quick scramble, do things, and that's where you sort of end up Frankensteining something. We worked 3 years ago and designed very carefully and methodically, and that's why we've got a lot of interest internationally. The New Zealanders who have been a lot at this a lot longer than us.
Yeah.
How did you guys do that? Like you've just sort of
From a broad, you mentioned the R&D side of things now, and yesterday we heard that the ag sector, including fishery and forestry, is sitting about 107 billion. I think the estimates on R&D spend in Australia is about the 3 billion mark. So percentage-wise, less than 3% is spent on R&D as a sector. Is that enough money going to it in a percentage term, or the fact? I think there was a query today about on a GDP basis we're quite high in terms of what we spend, but is that enough to really kind of innovate successfully?
Yeah. The question about is it enough funds? I can't really answer that as enough fund because we're not specifically working on the research volume. But what I can say is what I think about is how do we apply the existing money we have in multiple ways, different ways. And I sort of talk about that horsepower of collaboration to work more consistently, keep specialising, I mentioned, but I think that it's about the application of the funds in different ways to make them work harder, sweat those dollars down harder. That's why I think about it. They're bigger questions for government and economists to talk about.
It's more like a laser focus as opposed to a scattergun approach that you guys are taking.
Well, you've got to be really specific because
there's only so much money.
And there's a big wicked problem. We have to look at long-term issues. So what I mentioned before, we thought about this 3 years ago, and you had to cast the eye forward and say, this is going to come. Now, what would have happened to us if, mandatory reporting didn't come in and all these sorts of things? We'd go, we misread that one.
Misread it.
So you have to think forward and really go deep on, is this going to happen? And listen to the supply chain saying, this is going to be needed. And if left to us, we'll be a bit unorganised. We need some coordination and some really deep thinking here. So I think that's a hard part. You've got to look forward. It's a messy market gap that the commercial sector's saying, commercial sector only want to invest in things that they can get an immediate return from or a foreseeable return on. So we have to get really super organised for those things that are coming down the path. And look, there are things we've put out there that we didn't get the attention of our RDC investors and said not for us now. We'll sort of go back to the drawing board on some of those things.
We're running close to time just now, but I've got one sort of point-stroke question to ask you. You've been in that role for 3 years?
4.5.
4.5. Time goes by when you're having fun. But things have massively changed since in the last 4 years. AI wasn't really a common occurrence. So now we've got things like Claude, ChatGPT, Gemini, which all allow you to vibe code effectively. So to make code, make new projects without the cost. Like previously, if Matt and I had an idea that uses some form of coding and programming, we couldn't do it, so we'd have to get a developer in, which would cost hundreds of dollars an hour. Whereas now we can prototype and test things effectively using Vibe programming. Do you think that's an area for research and development and for startups in general, that they can actually more effectively road test things compared to what they were in the past, where you'd actually have to invest a lot of money before you even see something, whereas now you can create something you can see
Like a proof of concept before you
in
invest
days.
more.
So do you think innovation is actually going to accelerate now with AI?
Yeah, we can do more testing and more adjustment to those thoughts than we've ever been able to before. When I think about that in our own company, I'm thinking about AIA becoming more. We see ourselves as context engineers.
Yep.
We look at that context and we engineer it in a way. AI won't be able to do that. You've got to understand the issues and put that context in there and be super good engineers.
It can't create new things.
Yeah, it can't. But look, I worry if it's going to pump out more because in some places there was a great question on the floor about, hey, tell us about adoption. And I'm saying, like, if you're sitting in front of a producer and they don't need what you're offering, you are the problem.
Yep.
Not them.
Yep.
You have to change your way.
Yeah. And I know we're getting close to time, but in one kind of, or maybe there's a few things here. The role you've been doing now in this innovation space, what would you say? Is there a particular barrier or a set of barriers that are the main things that's stopping innovation proceeding? Is there something you kind of tend to come up against often? What would those barriers be if there's one single one, or are there a handful?
I think it's really hard, and this is just a conversation about where we've seen. I think we are all under a lot of pressure for immediate returns. So the immediacy and tight budgets, like the allocation of budgets is really hard. You can come across that because it's a multi-speed system. We've talked about that. There's other burning platforms and priorities, so trying to take a little bit from this and looking at the horizon stuff, that's not an issue for me now. That's now, it will be in the future. I've got to work on the now. So there's two answers there. You say, one answer is saying, you work on the wants. We want this tomorrow, and we'll work on the needs of the future and get organised so we can, create an advantage out of some things that have probably seen as a handbrake, a drag on our, bottom line when it comes to reporting all of those things. Make that seamless.
Yep. Well, the whole problem in innovation is to make things easy.
Easier.
Like the point from, I think, Sarah was, if you're just looking at horses, all you want is a faster horse. But a car makes it much easier to travel distance.
That's right, and I think innovation is just the application of an idea for an impact.
That's a good point.
And that's it. R&D is a point of focus to better understand the problem and the drivers of that problem. On that formula in this last session, that was probably one of the areas where I would have loved to spend more time saying, pull the I out of the R&D, and because that's another tool, that's a piece of equipment that you've got to think separately about and give it the environment that it needs to do its thing. And as I said, collaboration is brings a whole new set of horsepower when you do it at that scale, which we look for.
All right, good point to finish, I think. Good point, fabulous insights, and great chatting and fleshing some stuff out with you further. Sam Brown, thanks for your time.
And everyone who's online, you can continue the discussion by going to the right corner of the screen where it says discussion, funnily enough. So thanks, Sam, for coming up.